Beyond the Red Line, Episode 3, Aileen Wuornos, Highway Justice. There's a certain stretch of American highway where the night feels heavier, where truck stop lights flicker, where motels rent by the hour, where women walk with their thumbs out and their guard up because they know exactly what the world thinks they're worth. Between 1989 and 1990, on the highways of Central Florida, one woman decided she was done being prey. She was done being scared in the passenger seat. She was done being the body left in the woods. Her name was Aileen Carol Wuornos, a hitchhiking sex worker who shot and killed 7 men, and said she did it because they were trying to rape, torture, or kill her. The courts called her a serial killer. The media called her a monster. But for many women, especially sex workers and survivors, Aileen became something else. A symbol of what happens when a woman who's been hurt her whole life finally fights back. Tonight, on Beyond the Red Line, we go inside the life, crimes, and legacy of Aileen Wuornos, the woman who turned the highway into a battlefield. Aileen Carol Pittman was born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. A leap year baby born into a life that never really gave her solid ground. Her mother, Diane Wuornos, was just 14 when she married her father, Leo Dale Pittman, a man with a long history of mental illness and violent behavior. By the time Aileen was born, the marriage had already collapsed. Diane abandoned Aileen and her brother Keith when Aileen was about 4 years old, leaving them in the care of their maternal grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos. Aileen never met her father. He was in prison, convicted of sex crimes against children, and later died by suicide in his cell. The home she was left in wasn't safe either. She later described her grandfather as violent and sexually abusive, a man who beat her, called her ugly and worthless, and allegedly forced sexual acts on her. By age 13, Aileen was pregnant, reportedly after being raped by a friend of her grandfather. The baby was taken away for adoption shortly after birth. Imagine that, 13 years old, assaulted, pregnant, disbelieved, shamed, then stripped of your child and sent back into the same house. Not long after, she was kicked out of the home entirely. By 15, Aileen was living in the woods near her Michigan town, trading sex for food, cigarettes, and a place to sleep. She wasn't choosing sex work. She was surviving. In the 1970s, Aileen did what a lot of runaways did. She drifted. She hitchhiked across the country, sleeping in cars, ditches, and strangers' houses. She was arrested for minor crimes: disorderly conduct, DUI, theft, pulling a gun out during an argument. She got married briefly in 1976 to a much older man, a 69-year-old yacht club president in Florida. But the marriage fell apart after weeks of volatile fights and restraining orders. Florida became her base. The sun, the highways, the endless traffic and tourists. They created the perfect ecosystem for hitchhiking and sex work. She could stand near a ramp, thumb out, and know that eventually someone would pull over. By the mid-1980s, she was living almost entirely on the road, working as a street-based sex worker along highways, truck stops, and remote roads. She knew every rest stop bench, every cheap bar, every motel desk clerk who didn't ask questions. In 1986, at a Daytona gay bar, Aileen met a woman who changed everything. Tyria Moore a hotel maid from Ohio. They quickly became lovers, roommates, and co-conspirators in survival. They moved between motels and apartments, funding their life mostly through Aileen's sex work and small-time hustles. Aileen finally had what she'd never had before: someone she loved, someone to come home to after a night on the highway. And that made her more determined than ever to keep going, no matter how dangerous the work became. On paper, the first known killing happened in late 1989. But if you listen to Aileen talk, the violence started long before that. In every car where a man grabbed too hard, pushed too far, ignored the word no. Her first known victim was Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner from Clearwater, Florida. On November the 30th, 1989, Mallory left his shop, reportedly saying he was going to take a break. He never returned. Somewhere along a Florida highway, he picked up Aileen. Exactly what happened next depends on who you believe. The state's version: Mallory was a random client. Aileen shot him multiple times, robbed him, and left his body in the woods. Aileen's version: Mallory drove her into a remote area. Things turned violent. She said he tied her up, raped her, brutalized her. She managed to free one hand, grab her gun, and fire in a fight for her life. What the jury didn't hear at her trial is that Mallory had previously spent about 10 years in prison for a violent sexual assault in another state, a fact discovered in 1992 by a journalist after Aileen was already convicted. On December 13th, 1989, hunters found Mallory's body in a wooded area of Volusia County near Daytona Beach. He had been shot multiple times in the chest. His car was later found abandoned. To police, it looked like a cold-blooded highway murder. To Aileen, it was something else. The moment she realized no one was ever going to save her, so she would have to save herself. After Mallory, the killings began to follow a pattern, compressed into just 12 months between late 1989 and late 1990. Victim 2, David Spears, age 43. Occupation: construction worker. Last seen, June 1st, 1990, leaving Sarasota, Florida, heading toward Central Florida in his pickup truck. His body was found June 13th, 1990, in Citrus County, naked except for a baseball cap. He had been shot 6 times. Aileen later admitted she shot him. Again, she said it was self-defense, another man who turned violent when he thought her life was cheap. Victim 3, Charles Carskadden, age 40, last seen May 31st, 1990, heading toward Tampa in his Cadillac. His body was found June 6th, 1990, in Pasco County. He had been shot 9 times, 9 bullets. That's not an accident, that's rage. Victim 4, Peter Seams, age 65, occupation, retired merchant seaman, last seen June 7th, 1990, leaving Jupiter, Florida, driving north towards New Jersey. He vanished on the road on July 4th, 1990. His car was found abandoned in Orange Springs, Florida. Witnesses saw 2 women, later identified as Aileen Wuornos and Tyria Moore, leaving the vehicle at the scene. A palm print inside the car linked it to Aileen. Seam's body was never found. but Aileen eventually confessed to killing him too. Victim 5, Troy Burris, age 50, occupation, delivery driver for a sausage company. Last seen, July 17th, 1990, leaving his Ocala workplace for a delivery route. He never came back. On July 19th, 1990, his body was found in a wooded area in Marion County. He had been shot twice. Another man alone on back roads. Another client who thought no one would miss a sex worker. Victim 6, Charles Dick Humphreys, age 56, occupation, retired Air Force major, former police chief, child abuse investigator. Last seen, September 11th, 1990, leaving his office. On September 12th, 1990, his body was found fully clothed in Marion County, shot 6 times in the head and torso. His car was later discovered abandoned in Suwannee County. This one shook people. He wasn't just any man. He was someone who had spent his life inside law enforcement, supposedly protecting victims like the kind Aileen used to be. Victim 7, Walter Geno Antonio, age 62, occupation, truck driver, reserve police officer. Last seen, November 11th, 1990. On November 19th, 1990, his nude body was found near a remote logging road in Dixie County. He had been shot 4 times. By the time Antonio's body was found, detectives were finally ready to admit what was happening. Somebody was hunting men on the highways of Florida, and they were pretty sure that somebody wasn't a man. Detectives didn't just have bodies, they had cars. Cars tied to victims. Cars witnesses saw with 2 women inside. Cars that later showed up abandoned with fingerprints and palm prints that didn't match the victims. By late 1990, police were circulating composite sketches of 2 women suspected of driving stolen vehicles belonging to missing men. Those sketches made their way through bars, biker hangouts, truck stops. Eventually, someone recognized the faces. The name that came back was Aileen Lee Wuornos, and the woman who'd been at her side? Tyria Moore. On January 9th, 1991, undercover officers watched as Aileen drank at a bar called The Last Resort in Port Orange, Florida. It was the kind of place where no one blinked at a rough voice or a scarred face. That afternoon, they arrested her on an outstanding warrant, not for murder, but on an old firearms charge. Tyria, who had quietly left Florida and gone back to Pennsylvania, was quickly located and brought in. Police gave Ty a choice: cooperate or risk being charged as an accomplice. Scared, broke, and overwhelmed, she agreed to help. Over the next days, Ty made a series of recorded phone calls to Aileen from a motel, crying and begging for reassurance. She told Aileen the police were pressuring her, that she needed Aileen to tell the truth so she wouldn't go down for the murders. On the tapes, you can hear Aileen's voice soften. She tells Ty she loves her. She tells her she never wanted Ty to get hurt. And slowly, she starts to confess. On January 16th, 1991, after several calls, Aileen finally broke down and told detectives that she had killed multiple men, but insisted again and again it was self-defense. She said the men had attacked her, threatened to rape or torture her, and that when it came down to it, she believed it was either them or her. The state of Florida decided to take Aileen to trial, first for the murder of Richard Mallory. On January 13th, 1992, her trial opened in Daytona Beach. with cameras in the hallways and reporters in every row. Prosecutors painted her as a cold-blooded serial killer, a predator who seduced men, robbed them, and executed them for money. But the most devastating blow to her self-defense claim came from something called Williams Rule evidence, Florida's rule that allows evidence of other crimes to be introduced to show a pattern. That meant that even though she was only being tried for the murder of Mallory, the jury heard testimony about all the other murders, too. Police, forensic experts, and witnesses walked through body after body, bullet after bullet, dumped car after dumped car. The jury saw a pattern, not of a terrified woman fighting to survive, but of a repeated cycle of pickup, robbery, murder, and disposal. What they didn't see was Mallory's prior rape conviction, a history that might have supported her version of that first night. That information was not presented in court and didn't surface publicly until later, when reporter Michelle Gillen uncovered that he had spent years in prison for a violent sexual assault. To the jury, Mallory looked like a random electronics store owner. To Aileen, he looked like every man who had ever hurt her. On January 27, 1992, Aileen Wuornos was found guilty of first-degree murder in the Mallory case. 4 days later, on January 31st, she was sentenced to death. In the months that followed, she either pled guilty or no contest to the murders of Spears, Carskadden, Burris, Humphreys, and Antonio, receiving additional death sentences each time, 6 in total. Aileen went from being a highway hooker the world ignored to a global headline. The 1990s and early 2000s turned Aileen into a pop culture figure. She was interviewed on national TV, filmed pacing in her prison cell, lashing out at camera crews, accusing guards of torturing her. Her mental state deteriorated under the pressure, isolation, and the knowledge that the state fully intended to kill her. Psychologists diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder and possible other mood disorders, conditions strongly associated with severe childhood trauma, abandonment, and chronic abuse. Feminist scholars and legal advocates began to see her as more than just a female serial killer. They wrote articles with titles like Woman's Right to Self-Defense, The Case of Aileen Carol Wuornos. They argued that her entire life had conditioned her to expect male violence. The legal system failed to adequately consider her abuse history, and public fascination with her was rooted in society's discomfort with a woman who killed the men who tried to dominate her. She became a kind of dark feminist icon, not because what she did was simple or clean, but because her story forced people to ask, what happens when a woman who has been raped, beaten, abandoned, and ignored her entire life decides she will never be a victim again? Is that justice? Is that revenge? Is it both? And why do we only call it serial killing when the woman pulls the trigger, but not when the world repeatedly throws her to wolves? After a decade on death row at Florida State Prison, Aileen stopped fighting her sentence. She dismissed her lawyers, told the court she wanted to die, said she was tired of the system, tired of appeals, tired of the constant scrutiny. On October 9th, 2002, at around 9:47 a.m., Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection in Starkey, Florida. She was 46 years old. Her reported final words were bizarre, poetic, apocalyptic, promising she'd be back, traveling on a spaceship with Jesus and some 1990s sci-fi characters. Whether that was mental illness, performance, or some twisted form of control over her own ending, no one really knows. What we do know is this: the state that ignored her when she was a homeless 15-year-old sex worker had no problem giving full attention to her death. Legally, the system won. It took her life. But culturally, emotionally, symbolically, Aileen Wuornos did something the world wasn't ready for. She flipped the script. The monster the headlines sold us was also a child of rape and incest, a homeless girl trading sex for survival, a woman stalked and attacked by men on the margins of the highway, someone who repeatedly said, "They were going to hurt me, so I shot them first." Do we know for sure that every killing was self-defense? No. Even Aileen changed her story multiple times. But here's what's undeniable. Her life story forced millions of people to confront the reality of gendered violence, sex worker vulnerability, and how the justice system treats survivors who fight back, especially poor, queer, traumatized women. Her face has been on movie posters, her name on book covers, her words in documentaries and academic essays. She became, for better or worse, and whether she wanted it or not, an icon of the moment when a victim decides, not this time. The men she killed had power. She had none. So she took some. It came with a cost. For her, for their families, for everyone touched by those bullets. But in the end, Aileen's story refuses to stay simple. She is not just a serial killer, not just a victim, not just a symbol. She is all of them at once, and that's what makes her terrifying. That's what makes her compelling. And that's why, decades after those Florida highways ran red, we are still telling her story. Because on those dark back roads, in the cramped cab of a stranger's car, one woman decided that her life, a life everyone else had treated as disposable, was finally worth killing for. This is Beyond the Red Line. And tonight, we've traveled through the life and death of Aileen Wuornos, the woman who turned the role of victim inside out and made the world look twice at who we call a monster.